Hunt with passion. Never stop casting. Chase the dream. Welcome to Season 6 of Musky Mastery Outdoors. Brought to you by Bucher Outdoors, #1 in big game fish products. And by Recon Boats, made by craftsmen, built for fishermen.
Hey everybody, what's up, and welcome back to another Musky Mastery quick tips video. In today's segment, I'm going to talk to you about some bucktail casting and retrieving basic tips that are definitely, if you're not doing these, they're going to take your blade game to the next level. Now, before we go any further, I'm just going to talk to you about my equipment here. Of course, I'm fishing out of Recon's 895 tiller. This is St. Croix Legend Elite 9-foot medium heavy. I like a long rod when I'm fishing blades. I have got Bucher Outdoors 80-pound test beast braid. This is a super braid line. JBO steel leader here with no BS system, just a split ring there connected right to the lure. And of course, you've seen this lure before, probably seen it a lot. It's the old 500 Bucktail tinsel in grape flame. So what are, basic tips with regard to bucktail casting? First of all, let's talk about the amount of line that you should have out when you're casting. Do you want to have just a liter's worth of line out? Probably not. That's not enough line. So I usually tell folks when we're starting off learning bait casting, casting tips for blades, to probably give yourself a solid 2 feet of line. This will allow you to generate a little bit of a sling, generate some leverage, and be able to cast a good distance out. Now, if you're really talented, and it depends on what kind of boat you're fishing out of, or if you want to experiment, sometimes I will probably cast with like the 3 foot of line out. That just allows me to really generate quite a bit of momentum, and I can throw the bait a lot further. But again, generally speaking, you don't want to have just a liter's worth out. Although that's kind of safe, or probably the safest with regard to like the lure, it's just not going to usually generate the most power and the most punch up into the spots. So that's first thing. So I usually have about 2 feet of line out, something like that. And one of the things I tell folks, and just we're going to go through all the basics here when we're casting blades, is you want to kind of look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. You want to cast like Arnold Schwarzenegger when you're posing here, and you keep your arm pointed up toward the tree line. Terrible Arnold impersonation there, sorry. But the general idea though is that you want to release your bucktail high and toward the top of the tree line usually. That will allow you to get a little bit of a rainbow or a little bit of an arc. A lot of times I get clients that will throw, and again, when you're fishing in a stiff wind, yes, you want to throw something that penetrates and maybe is a little bit of a zip and a zip line right in toward the weed line or whatever you're fishing, rocks, timber. But most often I'm trying to get a little bit of an arc to the cast. So those are some basics. Of course, we want to go straight back, straight forward. You don't want to do any of this side swiping unless maybe you're the last person casting in the rear of the boat or something like that, or you're by yourself. But generally speaking, I go over my shoulder and toward the target. That usually is the way that I am able to cast most accurately. So, and that's super important when you're fishing whatever structure you're fishing. You want to cast pretty accurately. So 2 feet of line over your shoulder, and of course keep your thumb on the spool. Now I'm gonna demonstrate this, but here's the next thing I'm gonna tell you, and this is really one of the most fundamental and important bucktail casting tips, and this is it. As the lure is traveling out, now I'm a hybrid caster, okay? I cast righty, but you're gonna see me make this transition in midair. I'm gonna cast with my right thumb on the spool, and as the lure is flying out, I'm actually going to take my left hand, replace my right thumb on the spool with my left thumb on the spool. And I'm actually going, and then I'm kind of in the left hand mode because I palm my reel with my left hand. So as the lure is flying out, I'm going to change hands midair. I just kind of call it the changeover or the crossover or something when I'm explaining this to folks. So I'm going to bomb this out there, and as it's flying, I'm going to change my thumbs. And the reason I'm doing this is because, first of all, here's what you don't want to do. Okay, nice cast, lure hits the water. Now I go to palm the reel and engage. Now that was of course exaggerated, but what I'm showing you there is a lot of folks cast it out, it hits the water, and great job, and then the lure sinks into the weed cover and you've got a tangled mess and you've lost your opportunity to fish. So in order to avoid doing that, what you really need to do is thumb the spool and make sure that you're in, you've transitioned into your retrieval position as quickly as possible. So what I recommend doing is casting righty if you're a right-handed caster, and you can just reverse this if you're left-handed, casting with your right hand and then transitioning midair to your left arm, and then you can thumb the spool, stop the bucktail from moving, and begin the retrieve. And then you're not going to allow your lure to sink down into the weed cover. So here we go. It's in the air, I'm transitioning, I thumb the spool, and now, right when that lure hits the water, I'm right on it. I am right on it. Now, as far as a couple other basics with blade fishing, this pretty much goes for most every lure, but especially with blades, I'm pretty particular about this with customers. You always want to point the rod directly at the lure as much as possible. You don't want to do any of this. A lot of times I'll get guys that are, or gals that are, they're sitting there and they're talking and they got the rod over to the side here. Yeah, them cheese curds were good, huh? Yeah, oh yeah, I can't wait to get some more. You've just lost, if you were pointing direct, that was my impersonation of somebody talking on the Musky boat, of course. You wanna keep your rod pointed at the lure at all times. The basic premise of that is just that when a fish hits and you go to set the hook, you're putting the coals right to her. If you have your rod offset to the side, you've lost that much hook setting power. Always keep your rod tip pointed at the lure during the retrieve. The next thing I'm going to tell you when you're fishing blades, and folks just don't like to do this for some reason, I just don't know why, is keep your rod tip initially at like, a 45-degree angle or a 30-degree angle, especially when you're fishing heavy cover, to keep your lure out of the structure right away. So it's this general process of rod tip is high in the beginning, and as the lure approaches the boat, you lower your rod tip like this. So watch the transition, left thumb's on the spool, thumb the spool, and now I'm gunning the reel, rod tip is up high, I can see my blade because I'm getting it over some thick cover, and now you can see it's in the midpoint of the retrieve. I've dropped my rod tip. Now in the last quarter of the retrieve, my rod tip's actually in the water, and I proceed into the figure eight. So it's kind of this like transition of rod tips at 45, and then as you get 50% of your casts completed, now the rod tip is parallel with the surface, and then as the lure gets into that last 10 feet, my rod tip actually now goes totally below the surface, and I go transition into the figure eight. So I'm going to show you everything in one fluid motion here. So 2 feet of line, over the shoulder, release, transition, left hand on the spool, thumb the reel, rod tips high, gun it, get it going. Now as I can see it and I'm clear of any hazards and debris, now I can drop my rod tip down, and now I'm getting ready. I'm watching behind my lure, I'm watching the bucktail. Now the rod tip goes into the water and I go right into the figure eight. One of the things I tell folks, and I've mentioned this a couple times now in this video, when you're blade fishing, I like to start the retrieve hot, okay? A lot of times, and there's an old line, make them want it. You throw it into their house and zip it out of there. I generally will back off speed-wise later in the retrieve rather than back off in the beginning. Usually we're throwing into some kind of structure, so backing off in the beginning is generally speaking not a great idea because you're gonna get snagged. So the idea is to start it hot, and then if you do wanna let up, you can let up. One other thing that I want to talk about here before I let you go, and these are just a couple basic quick tips. If you don't do this stuff already, especially the transition with your hands, that's going to help you a lot. But one thing that you're hearing me say is thumb the spool. What does that mean? Thumbing the spool literally means as the lure is flying through the air, especially with blades, you want to literally pop your thumb on the spool and stop the lure. You don't want to do it with the reel handle because that's going to strip your gears. Thumbing the spool, what that's doing is as this grape flame's flying out there and it might be twirling a little bit, you stop the spool and everything lines up straight and bait has a tendency to start up better. A lot of folks will message me on Facebook and say, hey, you know, I'm having trouble with a particular blade. Usually my response is, well, are you thumbing the spool? Are you popping it before it hits the water? Now, you don't need to, it doesn't need to be right a foot above the surface. You can pop it when it's, you know, 10 yards above the surface. Doesn't really matter. But what you're doing is you're kind of aligning the lure so that when it hits the surface, you're ready to retrieve it. So you're not going to get snagged as often, and it makes that blade revolution start that much easier. So again, 2 feet of line out, bring it back, swing it out, right thumb's on the spool, left thumb's on the spool, hits the surface, rod tips up, crank hard to get it going. Now, as I'm clear of any debris or weed cover here, I drop my rod tip down, and you saw there when I you know, before I started to retrieve the lure, I thumbed the spool. And again, it's something that's kind of hard to detect when you're watching this video because I'm a little further away from the camera, but thumbing the spool is a great way to get your blade started. And then if that, you know, sometimes in addition to thumbing the spool, I'll gun the reel. So I'll just do a short cast here, thumb the spool, and you hear that? 1, 2, 3, boom, boom, boom. A lot of times I'll just pop it a couple times with the reel handle, and that will get those blades going. I really, and this is maybe a pet peeve of mine, I should say, I really try to avoid, and I don't like when people do this, it's just me, because well, I'll tell you why. I don't like this. So here's one thing not to do. So if you're having trouble with a bucktail, here's what I'd say, don't do this. You know, the old classic, oh, you know, give it a good pull and get it going. I mean, sure, it works, but I'd rather use my other 2 tactics of thumbing the spool and gunning the reel. When you give it that awkward jerk, you are generating slack in the line, and you are essentially just kind of enabling the lure to kind of free fall for just that moment. So I do not like that. I don't recommend it. If you do it and get away with it, that's fine. You know, you'll still catch fish doing that, but I wouldn't recommend it. So, oh, there you have it, folks. Those are my quick tips for blade fishing, just as far as casting. You know, again, when I get a lot of folks out here that are, you know, somewhat new to musky fishing, even folks that have fished a while. These are the fundamental casting, I should say, techniques that most folks are still learning, I should say. Let's put this kindly. They're still practicing these things, and so that's why I'm doing this video, is to kind of give you some tips as far as here's some things to work on if you're struggling with casting, because the fact of the matter is everybody can fish a blade. They're very easy to fish, but not everybody fishes them as well as the other person. A lot of people cast blades out there, but they get more weeds, they get tangles, they don't engage the retrieve properly. And yeah, you can throw a bucktail, a 5-year-old can throw a bucktail, but can you fish it well? That's the question. So hope these tips helped you, and hope this kind of puts a couple more fish in your boat this season. So I'll keep these quick tips videos coming during the guiding and filming season here. I've been guiding heavy, so don't have a ton of time to edit the full videos that you're used to seeing on the channel, but I know a lot of you folks out there love these quick tips stuff, so we'll keep them coming. So anyway, hope you enjoyed this one, and as always, thanks for watching.